بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. The question that we're going to look at in this presentation is the following. What does Islam say about a person's belongings after they die? Now, this is a very important question regarding a person's estate. Estate is a legal term, and in Arabic, the term that is used is tarika, meaning the things that a person leaves behind after they die, their properties, their wealth, their possessions. Now, although the Quran has put a lot of emphasis on this by detailing the rules regarding inheritance, regarding what is to be done with a person's estate, there is a lot of ignorance regarding this amongst even religious and practicing Muslims. And even where there isn't ignorance, there is still a lot of negligence when it comes to putting these rules into practice, which is a major sin and a major injustice. In Takmila Fath al-Mulhim, the commentary on Sahih Muslim, Mufti Taqi Usmani points out the following: the shares of inheritance is one of the most important of religious sciences and one of the greatest issues of livelihood and human interaction. The Sharia has thus given it such importance rarely found in other areas. Whereas you find the Noble Quran sufficing in most areas of legal rulings with an explanation of the general principles without going into the specifics and details, we observe in the topic of the shares of inheritance that it gives importance to clarifying its specifics and minute details, and clarifies the shares of each relative expansively and exhaustively. So while we find in other areas of law, like Salah, for example, there isn't so much detail or specifics given in the Quran. We find those in the Sunnah, for example. But when it comes to inheritance, because of the importance that is given to it in the Quran, we find detailed descriptions of these laws and even the minutiae and the specifics of it described in the Quran. Now, the general guideline, which is agreed by the scholars based on the text of the Quran and Sunnah, is that after a person dies, the leftover wealth of the deceased will be used firstly for their shrouding and burial expenses, followed by paying off their debts. Following that, a maximum of one third of what is left after that can be directed towards a voluntary wasiyah, bequest, if the deceased had stipulated one. Right, so a maximum of one third after the shrouding and burial expenses and paying off debts. Whatever is left after that, only one third of that is at the discretion of the person that died. Right, so often what is assumed by many people is that what will be done to a person's, or what will be done with a person's belongings after they die, is whatever the deceased requested, right? Or if the deceased left it at the discretion of a family member and said, whatever this family member chooses to do with it, I grant them that permission. And they assume that that's correct. No, that's not correct. The person that died has the discretion to direct only one third after burial and shrouding expenses and paying off debts towards his own or her own avenues, whether to specific friends or specific distant relatives or certain causes, right? But apart from that, everything else must be distributed according to the shares stipulated in the Sharia. Right? So the family members that survive the deceased, they will inherit or they will have fixed shares that are stipulated in the Sharia, right? Like the spouse of a person, the husband or the wife, like the children, like the parents, they will have fixed shares from the estate of the person that has passed away. So the Quran, coupled with the Sunnah and Ijma', have stipulated fixed shares that heirs are entitled to. It is a major sin and injustice to deprive heirs of their entitlement. Now, something very important to keep in mind about this is that, well, firstly, this is the general rule, of course. When you have heirs who are entitled to certain shares from the estate, if there is some mutual understanding or agreement, that's a separate issue where things can be divided a bit differently based on the mutual agreement of the heirs, right? So that's a separate issue. But what we're talking about is the original entitlement, right? And this original entitlement that is stipulated in the Sharia for different heirs is a ritual rule, right? So this is something very important to understand, right? It's something ritual. As one of the scholars, Imam Shatibi rahimahullah, one of the major scholars from about 700 years ago from Spain, he mentioned that al-furud al-muqaddara fil mawarith, he mentioned this as one example of these fixed shares in inheritance laws. These fixed shares are from the umur al-ta'abbudat. These are from the ritual rules of Islam, which means that although you can find general patterns and you can find general wisdoms within these rules, but these are what he refers to as umur jumliya. These are just general. They cannot be used to try to say that there's these wisdoms or there's these benefits to these rules which will be better served by different rules, and therefore we will change the rules of inheritance. No, you can't do that because these are ritual rules, umur ta'abbudat. And he said that the main specific basis of ritual rules, أما أمور التعبدات فعلتها المطلوبة مجرد الانقياد من غير زيادة ولا نقصان. So when it comes to issues like this, the specific basis that is desired and that is the objective from it is just obedience, right? So that's the main objective behind it, is just obedience without any addition and without any subtraction. And we see this is clear from the Quran as well, where it refers to the laws of inheritance, and then it mentions tilka hududullah. These are the boundaries set by Allah, and faridatan min Allah. Right? So in a hadith in Tirmidhi and other collections, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Inna Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala qad a'ta kulla dhi haqqin haqqah, fala wasiyyata liwarith." Indeed, Allah has given every person his due right from inheritance. Right? So, for instance, the parents and the children of the deceased will have fixed shares of inheritance stipulated in the Quran. فَلَا وَصِيَّةً لِوَارِثٍ. Hence, there is no bequest for an inheritor. Right? So that principle that we mentioned of a maximum of 1/3 of what's left can be directed towards a voluntary wasiyah. This cannot be directed to people who are already heirs, right? People who are already heirs who will be inheriting based on their fixed shares stipulated in the Sharia. A wasiyah cannot be directed to them, right? Because they already have fixed shares. Right? And the Quran in Surah An-Nisa, so in Surah An-Nisa, this is where you have the detailed discussions on the rules of inheritance and how the estate is split up. in different ayat of Surah An-Nisa. So in one of the ayat, it mentions للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون وللنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون مما قل منه أو كثر نصيبا مفروضا. So males receive a share of what their parents and relatives leave, and females receive a share of what their parents and relatives leave, whether little or much. And it's a divinely fixed share. It's a fixed share. Now, this stipulation within the Sharia was introduced a couple of years after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had migrated to Medina. Initially, the rule was slightly, or the rule was not this. It wasn't like fixed shares that were stipulated. Rather, there was more flexibility in terms of all of the wealth would go to a deceased person's children, besides a bequest or a will that that person, the deceased person, had written up before they died for their parents or other relatives. So that's how it was before, and that's mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah. But then this was abrogated, as Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu mentioned, as in this rule was changed. And then the rules of Surah An-Nisa were brought for a plethora of wisdoms, right? And then that came into force, and that's the final ruling that must be observed. So in commenting on one of the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allama Zafar Ahmad Uthmani rahimahullah mentions in Ahkam al-Quran that this verse shows that the executor of the estate, so the executor or the administrator of the estate, is the one who is responsible for a person's estate and how it's distributed after they've died, or the judge or the inheritor who finds unfairness in a will, whether mistaken or deliberate, must return it to fairness. Like someone who made a will for more than 1/3, right? If somebody made a bequest, where meaning within their voluntary part of their wasiyah, as in where they at their discretion are deciding for a part of their estate to be directed to a certain individual or certain cause or something like that, that's only a maximum of 1/3 that can be used for that purpose. But if they have increased it beyond a third, then obviously that's wrong, and they can't do that. So if the person who is responsible for implementing their will or administrating their estate after they've died notices this mistake, whether it's deliberate or mistaken, whether this person did it by mistake or did it deliberately, they must fix it, right? Or another example, for one of the heirs to be denied their share. So if somebody makes a will that I don't want this particular heir to be inheriting from me or getting their right, that's not up to them. That's not up to the person that died, right? Once they have passed away, the rules of Sharia apply. That's no longer their wealth, and they no longer have discretion over it. Hence, the wealth must be, the estate must be divided up in the manner that has been stipulated in the Sharia. So these are some of the lengthy passages in the Quran in Surah An-Nisa, ayah number 11 and ayah number 12 and 13 and 14. So this is a lengthy passage that is devoted, that is dedicated to describing the rules of inheritance. And part of this passage is the following, right? لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا فريضة من الله إن الله كان عليما حكيما. Right? You know not which of them is closer in terms of benefit to you. Right? In other words, as one of the scholars of tafsir, Imam Razi rahimahullah, mentioned, it means اتركوا تقدير المواريث بالمقادير التي تستحسنها عقولكم. Right? As in, if your minds, your intellects, find something to be good or appealing, abandon that, because you don't know and Allah knows. You may think something to be beneficial, whereas in reality it is harmful. So Allah knows better where the benefit lies. So hence he says, فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Right? And Imam Razi comments, إِشَارَةً إِلَى وُجُوبِ الْإِنْقِيَادِ لِهَذِهِ الْقِسْمَةِ التي قدرها الشرع وقضى بها. Right? Which means that it's necessary to just submit to this distribution that the Sharia has stipulated. Right? That's what it, so when it says فَرِيضَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ, it means that we must submit to this distribution of the Sharia, because Allah is indeed always knowing, it has indeed always been knowing and wise. And then these ayat are concluded with the following: these are the limits set by Allah. Those who obey Allah and His Messenger, He will grant them entry into gardens with rivers flowing beneath, where they will abide eternally. This is the great success. Whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger, transgressing His bounds, He will admit him into a fire, where he will remain forever. So he will have a degrading punishment. So very severe warning given at the conclusion of these rules for disobeying Allah's boundaries. Imam al-Alusi rahimahullah, in his famous tafsir, he mentions, في ختم آيات المواريث بهذه الآية إشارة إلى عظم أمر الميراث ولزوم الاحتياط والتحري وعدم الظلم فيه. So in ending the verses of inheritance with this verse is an indication towards the gravity of the matter of inheritance and the necessity of adopting precaution and diligence and avoiding unfairness therein. Right? So these ayat say that those who disobey Allah and transgress the bounds, they will have eternity in Jahannam. Right? Now, one question somebody may have is, as Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah mentions in his famous tafsir, Imam al-Tabari was a major scholar of tafsir from the early period, from more than 1,000 years ago. He said, أَوَ مُخَلَّدٌ فِي النَّارِ مَنْ عَصَى اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فِي قِسْمَةِ الْمَوَارِثِ. If somebody disobeys Allah in terms of, disobeys Allah and the Messenger in terms of the distribution of the estate, are they going to be eternally put into Jahannam? So then he replied that yes, if along with the disobedience, he doubts this obligation. So as in, he doubts the obligation to follow these rules that are mentioned in Surah An-Nisa, and he says, no, these rules don't apply, for example, or I don't have to follow these rules. So if along with the disobedience, this is his belief, then of course they have committed disbelief, and therefore they will be destined for eternity in Jahannam. Or he knows that this is what was revealed in the Quran, but he opposes it. He says, all right, this may be what the Sharia says, but I think it's wrong. Of course, again, so they're opposing Allah's commands, right? And he mentions this in the context of a narration of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, who said about certain of the munafiqun who belittled these rules within these ayat, and they said, are even children and women being given such big shares of inheritance? Because this was not the norm in Jahiliyyah, where even children were entitled to substantial shares of the inheritance. So they were poking fun at these rules. So it's referring to these types of people who oppose these rules of the Sharia, or have doubt in it or reject it, right? So if they are disobeying these rules of inheritance, along with this rejection or doubt or opposition or belittling the rules, then of course they are destined for eternity in Jahannam. But if they know that this is what Islam says, this is what the Sharia says, but they neglect it, and they accept that this is wrong, and they accept that what the Sharia says is correct, and they don't belittle it, then they won't become disbelievers. They won't, and they won't be destined for eternity in Jahannam, but they will be guilty of a major sin. So, just as an example of how it's distributed, so there will be, inshallah, a course with As-Subah, where the rules of inheritance, the Islamic rules of inheritance, will be elaborated upon and explained in detail. And where obviously here, this is just explaining the importance of this issue, but there's a lot of other secondary issues as well regarding the rules of inheritance. So those will be touched upon, and more details will be given in that course, inshallah. But just as an example, after the Battle of Uhud, one of the very wealthy Sahaba, Sa'ad ibn Rabi' radiyallahu anhu, he was martyred in the Battle of Uhud, and his wife then came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Sa'ad ibn Rabi''s brother has taken all of his wealth and left nothing for herself and left nothing for his two children, his two daughters. So then, based on what the Quran says regarding the rules of distribution and inheritance, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then summoned Sa'ad ibn Rabi''s brother and said to him that this is how it has to be distributed. Right? أعطي ابنتي سعد الثلثين وأعطي أمهما الثمن وما بقي فهو لك. Right? As in, 2/3 will go to 2/3 of Sa'ad ibn Rabi's entire estate. 2/3 of that will go to his two daughters. So then they'll get 1/3, 1/3 each. And 1/8 of that will go to his wife, as in their mother, the mother of these two girls. And then the remaining will go to you, meaning his brother, Sa'ad ibn Rabi's brother. So this is based on the Islamic rules of distribution. So here, of course, the lion's share is going to the two daughters. Now, there are many benefits and wisdoms. And as I said at the start, that the benefits and the wisdoms in ritual laws is not the reason why the laws are practiced. The reason is just purely submission and obedience. But there are many wisdoms to these laws, which the scholars have elaborated on. Right? And so in Hujjatullah al-Baligha, Shah Waliullah al-Dihlawi, he explains some of these wisdoms in quite some detail. And one of the clear wisdoms is, as he mentions, is qat'an li munaza'atihim wa saddan li dhagha'inihim. As in, if you have this clear system of inheritance of fixed shares that are stipulated by the Sharia, then there can't be any dispute and there won't be any resentment. Whereas if it's just left to the discretion of the person that died, for example, or a particular person that he appoints to do with the wealth as they please, then that could result in dispute. It could result in resentment, as in, why did that person, why did this relative get more than I did, right? So all of that will be avoided just by submitting and obeying these rules. Of course, there are many, many other wisdoms. Like, for example, in most cases, there are a couple of exceptions, which Shah Waliullah Dehlawi mentions, and he explains why those exceptions, or what's the wisdom behind those exceptions as well. But in general, when you have a female and a male at the same level, right, the female will get less than the male, right? But and he explains different reasons or different wisdoms behind this. And for example, one of the wisdoms is because because men have the duty of expenses, many expenses. بخلاف النساء, as opposed to the females, فإنهن كل على أزواجهن, because they are taken care of, as in the Sharia has stipulated that they should be taken care of, right, by their husbands or their fathers or their sons, right? And he refers to the ayah الرجال قوامون على النساء from Surah An-Nisa, right? So this is one of the wisdoms. So as I said, that even though these are some of the wisdoms, that doesn't mean that it's limited to just these wisdoms. لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا, as the Quran says, right? As in, we don't know, but Allah knows. Hence why we stick to فريضة من Allah. We stick to how Allah has stipulated the distribution and the shares. So to summarize, it is necessary to be observant of Allah's commands in all aspects of life, right? So Islam and Deen is not limited to just worship or to just beliefs, right? But it extends beyond that to issues of financial interactions, issues of just daily personal interactions with other people. So there's and the rules of Deen have to be observed in all aspects of life. Muslims must be mindful about inheritance rules, even if one doesn't know the detailed Sharia rules. And as I said, there will be a course, inshallah, with As-Subath that will go into these detailed Sharia rules. So even if one doesn't know them, they must associate themselves with scholars who will guide them when a situation of inheritance arises. Ignorance and negligence is very common in this area. Hence, it's necessary to raise awareness on this issue. Denying a person of their rightful share from a relative's inheritance is a major sin, right? And this is unfortunately pervasive, where certain people will just monopolize, they will seize the entire estate, and if they give a certain portion to beneficiaries who are entitled to a share, they will give whatever they want, but they won't give them their full share, or they may give them nothing, right? This is a major sin and a major dhulm. Rules of inheritance are detailed in the Quran and must be ritually observed. They contain many wisdoms and benefits, including that they prevent any dispute or resentment over how the estate is distributed. Right, and so we'll end here. May Allah enable us to stay within the boundaries that He has set and be obedient to Him, and as a consequence, be entitled to eternity in Jannah. Ameen. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.